Today on Writers on the Road, we're spending the day trout fishing at the side of a pond near Corner Brook with Douglas Walbourne-Gough. Every year at Writers at Woody Point, we invite authors from around the world to our small town in Newfoundland to tell their stories in our favorite place. Now we're hitting the road to visit some of our favorites in places that are special to them. I'm Stephen Brunt, and this is Writers on the Road. Douglas Walbourne-Gough is a poet born and raised in Corner Brook, Newfoundland. He describes himself as mixed-adopted Mi'kmaq and is a status member of the Hullaboo First Nation. Doug's first collection of poetry, Crow Gulch, centered on a now-lost Mi'kmaq community on the Bay of Islands. On a hot, midsummer day, I met with Doug at the side of the road in Massey Drive. We wandered down a dirt track to Doug's chosen location, the shores of a pond that, these days, feels a bit less remote than it did when he used to go trout fishing there with his family as a boy. Before we sat down to talk, we decided to wet a line and try our luck. Now, spoiler alert, we didn't catch a thing, but we did meet a lot of black flies and stouts, Newfoundland's massive deer flies. After fishing, we sat down to chat on a small pebble beach right beside the pond. First of all, thanks for bringing me here. I don't show people my secret fishing spots, so I think that's the most generous thing a person can do, is to take a fisherman to take another fisherman into their spot. So tell me, like, where are we here?
So known locally as Parsons Pond, not to be confused with the community up the coast. A place that I grew up fishing with my parents and my sister. A place that, as time went on, spent a lot of time in canoe with my dad here, one-on-one fishing. That is when my mother wasn't in that other seat in the canoe. She always gets first dibs. But a place that's become, for me, for the last 33, 34 years. I learned to fish here. I learned a lot about life, about land, about mindfulness.
Yeah, it strikes me because, when I think of Newfoundland, Corner Brook is a small place, but a city, an industrial city.
Yeah, very much.
The idea of kind of escaping from an urban environment and getting to a natural environment is something in central Canada where I live some of the year, and where I grew up. That's a thing that if you lived in Toronto or Hamilton or Montreal, or that you go out to find nature and get in the car and find nature. Here, it's kind of self-evident, right? You're in a vast, largely underpopulated island. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. But the idea of being a Corner Brooker and still kind of having this little natural refuge, that intrigues me, that idea.
Oh, it goes a long way. I wouldn't be the person I am without that. Because, people, when I've lived in other provinces, people say, from Newfoundland, you must have grown up out in a dory cod fishing. It's like, didn't have that at all. It was always out here in the woods, trout fishing, rabbit, moose, berry picking, stuff like that. But it was very much a terrestrial rather than ocean-based sort of thing.
Yeah. I think one of the things where we want to get at in these interviews is kind of the idea of place and how that relates to people's work, mm-hmm. and home, I think, as well, and how that relates to people's work. I've been coming out here for 25 plus years now, and Corner Brook is the closest kind of major service center to where I am. So I spend a lot of time back and forth to Corner Brook a lot. I know that drive. I've never, and I was here in the winter during the March Hare years and all of that. But the city in some ways still kind of puzzles me. It does, and the layout of the city puzzles me. The history of the city puzzles me. So tell me, explain Corner Brook to me, for somebody who, again, I know where the grocery store is and right. things, but explain kind of what it means to be, what Corner Brook is and what it means to be from Corner Brook.
The thing I notice time and time again is people who come here, they are immediately struck by the amount of wilderness that's close by, even the amount of foliage in Corner Brook itself. I mean, if you look from a high vantage point, you can't see townsite. Mm-hmm. It's just maples everywhere. It's really, really beautiful to see. But having grown up here, coming from where I come from Dunfield Park, and then my dad's family from Crow Gulch, it's a marginalized look in And so there's something about that distance from which to see it all that I've been able to see some patterns that have continued, even, to my childhood, even into my adulthood, that really bring into focus that Corner Brook is, 100 years old, give or take. That's, 4-ish generations. And when this place was built around that single industry of the mill, the mill's hiring practices were exclusionary by race. And the planned town site, of course, which is what town site's named after, that was for people who worked in the mill, people who ran the mill. And there were even divisions of your position within the mill based on the style of house you had. And this isn't it's not specific to Corner Brook. This has happened in other places, single industry
Company town kind of. Though.
Exactly,
absolutely.
yeah.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, the divisions of class and race that really kind of started the ball rolling here, and kind of orchestrated by Bowater in the beginning, and not in any way that was nefarious. No, I don't think anyone was twisting their mustache per se, as just carrying on industry in a small place in the way they knew how. But the small ways in which, even though we're 100 years into this thing now, there's still social divisions that are there. I think, the lines of class and race, and to a smaller degree religion, that were really outset and very stark at one point, I think those are blurring and hopefully dissolving, but it's not completely gone. And I look at books like Percy Jane's House of Hate, that's published in 1970, and then as recently as 2010, Tom Finn wrote a collection of short stories called Westsiders. And for me specifically, personally, it's House of Hate is full of disparity toward Crow Gulch, toward mostly the women of Crow Gulch. And then there's a short story in that Westsiders collection that also takes a real unflattering, it gives a very unflattering take on the people of Crow Gulch, and then ties in Mi'kmaq identity to that, and then use of the word Jackie Tar in that specific story. And I can't quite guarantee this is verbatim, but I think one of the lines of dialogue in the story from the narrator is, "Thank God I'm not a Jackie Tar and don't have to live in Crow Gulch." And so that, that's a 40-year span of Newfoundland literature that kind of speaks specifically to the class and race intersection.
So just a couple of, I think we need a couple of identifiers for people here who may not know Corner Brook. And in the Crow Gulch, even if they know Corner Brook, they may not know Crow Gulch, right, although I assume they've all read your book. But Dunfield Park, you mentioned.
Yeah.
So explain what that is, that area, that neighborhood.
Right. So Corner Brook's first large-scale social housing project. So when Crow Gulch was, eventually legally ushered off its land, Dunfield Park was where the majority of those people ended up. There was a nominal value attached to the houses in Crow Gulch that would be paid out. I believe it's $300, which, in the late 60s was considerably more than it is now, but it wasn't very much. So public housing was, it was a readily available place to go live, socially controlled rent. And, for people who grew up in Crow Gulch, we're talking the first time having maybe running water, having heat, insulation, or at least in the ways we think about it now, in like a fully formed home. Yeah, so that's where I lived from the time I was, I think, 2 till 8. And then we moved from Dunfield Park up to 500 meters up the hill to another social housing project, Centennial Place. But yeah, so social housing is all I knew till I was 20. And that's when my parents got the house they live in now. So socially around Corner Brook, Dunfield Park was not a place you wanted to be from. So it was nicknamed the Bean. So Jelly Bean Square.
Because of the color of the houses, right?
Yeah, so usually 8-unit row houses, and each unit at that time was a different color. Now each row is its own color. But back then, I think each unit had its own color, and so it was named that. So when we think about Jelly Bean Row now, we think about maybe St. John's and the wine named after it.
The cute stuff in St. John's, right? Yeah.
The tourism commercials with the high saturation, and, just call Sandra, and they'll help you out. Yeah, so it became a place of, obviously poverty because it's social housing. Then, of course, associated with being criminal, with being deviant. I've had it thrown at me, in terms of intelligence, cleanliness, and then the prefix of beaner. And then if your car was, old, falling apart, you could call it a jalopy, or you can call it a beaner mobile. Or if your boots were falling apart, look at Buddy's beaner boots. I still hear it every now and again around now, and there are moments when I choose to, correct someone, or like, can you qualify that statement, which has become something I think about a lot more. Because when you ask people to qualify stuff like that, it's like, I'm not trying to pick a fight, but let's interrogate why you say that particular term. Where do you think that comes from?
So, and Crow Gulch, which you've mentioned, obviously, and the title of your first book, if you were directing someone to go say, where's Crow Gulch, you'd say, well, there's a Jordan Bennett piece there now, right? So there is something that marks it, but it was essentially erased.
Yeah. So the city of Corner Brook in 1966 commissioned, if I can remember the name of the company, Project Planning Associates out of Toronto, hired them to do an urban renewal scheme study. So it studied far into Broadway, Pier Road, think a bit of Burke's Road and Crow Gulch. And the recommendation was to burn structures in situ, to prevent any recurrence of Crow Gulch, illegal ushering off the land, basically. There has been misreporting of the fact that it was bulldozed, it was raised down, as if to say, city officials chased people out with bulldozers. That did not happen. But it was like, we're going to get you off this land one way or another legally, and, gently and slowly, I guess, is like to offer people payout and this other place to go.
Like urban renewal in the 1960s, that kind of project, Regent Park in Toronto was part of that. Dodger Stadium, there was a community that was wiped out for Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. So it was happening. It was a movement in the 60s, right? Get rid of quote-unquote slums and build better housing for people, public housing for people. But so it was part of that, obviously, that kind of movement, which was a disaster in most urban environments, Hamilton, where I live, included. There's another element to Crow Gulch, though, which is the kind of the racial identity and the hidden racial identity. Just describe for people listening, who were the people of Crow Gulch? Yeah,
a lot of people who came from outside of the Bay of Islands, or from even maybe the outer Bay of Islands, to come in during the construction of the mill. Not exclusively Indigenous or Mi'kmaq people, but there were a lot of Mi'kmaq families there. My great-grandmother and my grandmother included. My dad was 6 or 7 when we moved out of there. And it's not universally everybody looked down upon Crow Gulch and Corner Brook, but there was a definite stigma, and that comes with terms like the word jacketar, which, again, you'll see in, as I mentioned, Tom Finn's West Siders in that one story. So there was a racial and class element to it.
Writing about home, often people write about what they know, especially initially in fiction. They do write about home, sometimes sentimentally, sometimes, with great hostility, right?
Yeah.
But, you're writing about home, a place that you obviously have great, affection for, but laying bare some really uncomfortable truths about it as well. You could talk a little bit about the kind of the double-edged sword of writing about a place you clearly love on some level, right? And on many levels. But, the aspects of it that, you clearly don't love.
Right. There is a poem in the new book called Corner Brook, and it talks about that, I talk about the divisions of class and race, and there's an interesting intersection of, like, knowing this place as a youngster from one of the wrong parts of town, and the level of, like, not outright exclusion, but, like, you find some sticking points. And then getting a job where I was very public facing all the time. I worked at Brood Awakening Cafe for 5 years. And so then a lot of the people whom I would never meet otherwise, and this is not to disparage them in any way, like just people who are well-to-do, financially secure. I get to know them. I get into a bit of mountain biking, a bit of trail running, and, hang out with some of them. then I start writing. And then this interesting thing happens where, some people look at you a little differently. And you're like, oh, you make things. You're a creator. You're an artist. You're a writer. So that's been an interesting step in. And then I'm invited to do things at the university. I've now taught courses up there on a contract basis, and so there's this, to put it, I guess, rudimentarily, there's like these steps up that I've been making. And the way that I think there are those who receive me the same way the whole time. And then there are others who, are surprised when they find out like, oh, you write books, you have a PhD, but you're also from Dunfield Park. And I, to bring that on a larger scale, when I was at UBC, a couple of times that people say, they ask where you're from and you say Newfoundland. They're like, oh, but you're in grad school. And so there's this dissonance, there's these assumptions that are made about where you come from that are like very, very local, but then are also kind of national. And there's a series of poems in the book that talks about that as well, and like the misperceptions of what it is to be a Newfoundlander. But even hyper-local to Corner Brook, yeah.
Look, thanks for this. Thanks for bringing us here. Fishing's lousy, but it's a beautiful spot. Maybe come back on it better and not as sunny and hot and perfect today. Fish don't like good weather.
They do not.
Would you, can we get you to read something?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I think I'll read a piece from Crow Gulch. I know a piece that's very fitting because it formed here. So this is titled My Father and I Fishing. So basically, as we talked about earlier, Steve, so I grew up in a canoe in this pond, over a couple of decades really, fishing across from Dad, facing each other in the canoe so we can both do the fly casting in the other way. So we have a very rudimentary but specialized way of going about it. To the untrained eye, I'm like, why are they facing each other? And why are their fly casts so short? Well, it's because we don't want to tip over, but we also want to talk. And I didn't realize that's not the way people usually canoed. Had no idea. And I've never river canoed. It's only been in ponds and lakes, kind of like this, for accessing trout. But as time went on, and there would be, yes, we're here to fill our freezer with trout for the winter. But then there's also these moments where, Dad would put the paddle down across the canoe and we'd just drift. And then he'd just say, we got this pond to ourselves. There's no one around. It's like, think about what you can hear right now. Just like it's so quiet. And sometimes it would be just watching that one bead of water go to the end of the paddle and drip. It's like, oh, my dad is engaging in mindfulness. This is great. I don't know if you'd ever call it that, but he's really good at it. And so then I thought about this canoe, much like sitting across from you now. I think about all the knowledge, the lessons, his character that was his mom and dad imparted to him, and now he's sharing that with me and making room as well for me to be my own person, ask my own questions, do my own thing. And so I kept thinking about this one axis of intergenerational time and knowledge, but then also, of course, this other axis, the vertical one. Think about the sky, and then the sky reflected on the surface, and then how we're breaking that surface tension just a bit to sit, and then of course the fish are below. And so it became this weird axes of intergenerational story and sharing, but also, thinking about land in terms of sky and land itself geographically, not just big L land like everything, and then also under the water and the consideration of the fish and, of course, depth and things like that. And then I found this perfect quote in a John Berger text, and I realized afterward, Damakai also uses this to begin a piece of his. Home was the center of the world because it was the place where a vertical line crossed with a horizontal one. My father and I fishing. Our old canoe nudges the pond's silver skin. Paddles pull through cloud-spackled sky as we set hooks in the mouths of brook trout. Breaching fish become bullseyes. Hand-tied flies flicked forward. Then that flash of fin and splash. A rod buckled half-moon in reward. I read this surface like scripture. Recognize time's slow fold in the drift of rivers. My grandfather's face in the fleeting wake of paddle strokes, but depth eludes me. I vie for this seat with my mother, usually end up hoofing the shore, smiling quietly while she outfishes my father, her glee peeling across the water like bursts of light. It makes me ache for my grandmother's company. Wish I'd shared this boat with her, watched her bird-bone frame form laughter mixed with the cry of diving loons. I sit across from him now, my coltish potential fumbling to keep up. From this canoe, he's seen himself in the sky, geese flying through his mind like seasons.